Mark. How we doing?
I'm doing good. I am trying to figure out all I can on past recessions, the United States has had, and then I guess around the world to kind of try to figure out what my opinion is. We keep hearing these, right now, if anyone's listening and wants to know the time, we're at May 6th. So we're kind of in the middle of coronavirus pandemic that here in Chicago and Illinois, we are still on a stay-at-home order. So what I've been trying to figure out is my opinion on if this is going to be one of those, the U curve, the V curve, or the L curve as far as how the economy will recover. So I've been talking to people, trying to talk to people far smarter than me.
Awesome. Do you have any little nuggets you want to share right now before we dive into this?
I have no nuggets on that, but if we're going to go into the landlording tip of the day, I'll give you that. So our landlording tip of the day, a lot of people are come to me and talk to me about Section 8 housing and talk to me about how do I know how much they're going to pay. I will leave a link in the show notes to talk specifically about Cook County. Cook County has their own housing authority, and there's a payment standard on there that shows kind of what you can expect as far as getting rents. I'm writing actually another blog on this today to kind of give an example as well too, and I'll leave a link to that as well. But Section 8 housing, you predict what you're going to get, what Section 8 will pay you is my tip of the day. You have to do that before you buy the property if you're going to want to put a Section 8 tenant in there.
Awesome. And obviously looking a lot more appealing these days. That guaranteed rent, all of a sudden, a lot of people making that shift over from market to Section 8.
Yes. That's, as we've been talking to owners the last 5 weeks on all these changes, it's funny how the landlords that have the subsidy tenants are the ones in the best shape right now, or at least the most shielded versus to not getting rent. So, but yeah, I'm excited about our show today. I think a lot of people listening know our guest, but we want to take a different spin to our show today. So our guest today, she heads up the largest Midwest real estate investment conference going on year 3 this year, which she'll talk about here in a few minutes. She's a managing broker of Second City Real Estate, which is a boutique brokerage that specializes in investment properties. She's been on many podcasts. You might have seen her on Bigger Pockets. I call her the gateway to Chicago for investors that are out of state. But I want to welcome here today, Brie Schmidt.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, welcome. We're excited to have you on here. And I know you've been on a lot of podcasts before, and people have, and you've given your story a million times, and I could probably tell it just as good as as you can almost. But we want to take a different approach today. So I'm excited to kind of share what you know and your access to people here in Chicago.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm ready for some. Be ready for some rants.
So let me ask this question to start. You have you've been on Bigger Pockets for longer than I have been. I think I got on there 14. You might have a couple of years on me there. You've met people have reached out to you from all around the world talking about the Chicago market. What are some of the assumptions that may be correct or incorrect that people have made when you first get on the phone with them about Chicago investing in real estate?
I think one of the biggest problems that people have or don't understand is how big the Chicago market is. So you'll see on Bigger Pockets, if there's ever a post about, population decline, you'll see me probably, laying into the poster about it, because you can't use, it's 294 square miles. Cook County, which is the county that Chicago's in, is 5.15 million people. You can't use blanket statistics and assume that is right across the entire market. Just like any other city, there's A, B, C, and D class markets. And what's going on in the A's is not what's going on in the D's. So I think that's people's biggest problem is they're just looking, I had a phone call yesterday with a couple that is in Congo right now. They're diplomats in Congo, and they're looking to invest in the U.S. market. And they're like, well, we've looked at, the U.S. News World Report's best cities to invest in, and we're looking at, economic growth, population growth. I'm like, all that's fine and dandy, but that really does not, even on a zip code level, that data can be completely inaccurate. So it's not just about sitting at your computer and looking at a market and looking at a bunch of stats and making a gut decision. You know, one of the examples I always use for anyone here in Chicago is there's a neighborhood called North Center. North Center is like what? Along Lincoln Avenue between Belmont and Irving Park Road. So North Center has one of the fastest declining populations in the city of Chicago. And it's a very desirable area to live in. A lot of the baseball and hockey and pro athletes live there because of the school district for their kids. But why is the population declining? Well, what they're not seeing is the story behind that statistic, which is that neighborhood typically, was about 10 years ago, the housing stock was about 60% small apartment buildings, about 10% condos, and 30% single family homes. Well, someone really smart back in about 2013 is when it happened, figured that you could buy a 2 to 4 unit property for less than you could buy a single family house of the same lot size, same square footage next door. You could buy it for a couple $100,000 less, but you could convert it into a single family house and build this giant 4,000 square foot mansion. You could buy it for like $600,000-700,000, put a few $100,000 into it and sell it for $2 million. And because the housing stock on single families back then was less than 30%, those properties were going off the market in a matter of days. So what happened was everyone else jumped on the bandwagon. You started to see it in 2014, 2015, 2016, where on the block that I used to live on, it was, if there was 30 houses, it was maybe 10 single families in 2013 when I bought in the neighborhood. Now there's maybe 10 apartment buildings. 20 of those units have been converted to single families. And now there's 5 or 6 in the market because everyone started deconverting. So of course you're going to lose population because you're decreasing the density of the housing, right? So there's so many things that go into the story of why things are happening that if you're just looking at a blanket statistic of like, oh, the whole city of Chicago or oh, the whole, Cook County area, you're not understanding the real story of what is going on. And if you cross Irving Park going north, well, now you're in a different school district. That's Coonley, not Bell. So, and that's all in the same zip code. So even on a zip code data, you're missing the story behind it because houses in Bell sell for a lot more than houses in Coonley. So that I think is people's biggest mistake. Even just this morning, I got an email from a potential client in Dubai. They're from Australia and they live in Dubai and they're buying a property, and they have literally no idea what anything about Chicago is. And so the first thing I had to do is, here's the crime map. You need to be looking at the crime map to understand, yes, you're buying a house on a double lot, but you're buying a house for $35,000, right? Why is that house $35,000? That's a car. You shouldn't be able to buy a house on a double lot for the price of a car. And when you pull up the crime map and you see all the arrests are crack or gun discharges, maybe that might question your decision to invest in that sort of neighborhood. So that's all the things that people don't see when we're looking out of state. They don't understand the micro situations that are going on in neighborhoods. And I know, Mark, you're more experienced in areas than I am on the south side. It is literally block by block. Your cash flow and your vacancy rate will be greatly different on one block versus the next. And people just don't grasp that concept.
So you have a portfolio of buildings. What neighborhood are you in for those buildings, and how have you seen those neighborhoods change in the last 10 years?
Yeah, so I've got properties in Chicago in Albany Park, Portage Park, and then North Center. My first building I bought was in Albany Park, which was in 2011. So it was after the housing crash. People were still, just starting to look for properties. I bought a rehabbed building for $300,000. I just had it appraised last year for $550,000. I've put zero work into the property. That was just appreciation over the last 8 years. But one of the reasons I bought in that neighborhood, because back then, Albany Park wasn't very well known, but it was near train stops. It was near a hospital. It's near 2 colleges. It's near a really big park. So I saw that the neighborhood had all the amenities to make it a great neighborhood. And I think it got named one of the top 25 zip codes in the US for hipsters moving in back in like 2017. So it's become like a hipster revolution. But again, it has all the, you can get downtown quite easily. You've got jobs in the area, local jobs from the hospitals and the schools, and it's got facilities like parks and all those programs. I also saw that there was a citywide, we call them TIF programs here in Chicago. So tax incremental funds, right, Mark? So there was a TIF, yeah, there you go. There was a TIF program going on in the neighborhood before the crash, which was to like help businesses update their storefronts. So those were all signs that I saw like, hey, when the housing market bounces back, you know, this is going to be an area that's primed for redevelopment. The other neighborhoods haven't really changed too much. Yep.
Yours truly over here was born in Albany Park. I was just 30 some years ahead of my time over at Swedish Covenant.
Yeah, that's where I had my baby, is Swedish Covenant.
Yeah, awesome. Brie, you didn't mention, which I was surprised, like Irving Park or Avondale or some of those other neighborhoods that are kind of all clumped in. Like you kind of skipped over going from Albany Park over to North Center. Do you own anything in that area? Do you see anything happening in those areas as well?
There's a lot happening in those areas. I mean, that's my area of expertise where I work as an agent. So I cover everything from Pilsen to Jefferson Park over to Evanston. But I would say our sweet spot tends to be along 90. So between, I would say, a few blocks west of Milwaukee to Western, from ΔeVercy up to Foster. That tends to be where about 90% of our business is. And my business, typically I work with house hackers, just so you know. But that area has seen a lot of movement over the last 10 years. And I like to explain it. It's like the progression of a Chicago night, right? So most people were not born and raised in the city of Chicago. They moved to Chicago, right? And when you first move to Chicago in your 20s, you end up either in like River North area, or you end up in Lincoln Park, right? Because that's where all the cool 22-year-olds live or go. So I find, though, that there's this progression of the Chicago person, and you always stay either east of the highway or west of the highway. Like, I've never lived west of the highway. I've always lived east of the highway. And I have a lot of people that they've always stayed west of the highway. But I'll use Lincoln Park as an example. So you're 22, you move to Lincoln Park, right? You're paying, I don't know, $3,000 a month with, 4 roommates in this like tiny apartment, but you're by all the cool bars and all those things. And when you're in your 20s and you're working downtown, like, that's cool. You can live in a shoebox and be, near Duffy's and all those cool bars. But then in your late 20s, you meet someone, right? And your girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, whoever is not going to want to live with a bunch of roommates on top of a bar. So where do you go, right? They go north and they go west. So the Lincoln Park person ends up somewhere around like Roscoe Village-ish, right? So now you're paying like $1,800 a month for maybe a 2-bedroom. It's kind of small, but then you get a dog or a cat, because you're testing out this whole marriage thing. But then you start really like planning life events. Life events meaning you want to buy a house, or you want to have a baby, or you want to pay for your $20,000 wedding. And now $1,800 a month in rent for a tiny apartment doesn't seem very feasible. It's not a very smart decision for you. And you're cool with, living a little bit further away, because going to the bars that are open till 4:00 in the morning isn't really a priority anymore. And then you keep going north and northwest. I see Mark laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Then you go then you end up in like Lincoln Square or maybe Albany Park area. And the same thing on the west side of the highway. You start with River North, you end up in Bucktown or Wicker Park, and then you move up to Logan or Avondale or even Portage Park. It's like the progression of a Chicagoan. So like my properties are generally in the third stage, where most of my tenants over the last almost 10 years they're saving up for some sort of life event. They want space. They want, a nice apartment, but they don't want to pay an arm and leg for rent. They have good jobs. They can well afford the place. And typically they leave me when they have babies or they buy a house in the suburbs. And they typically stay with me for like 2 to 3 years.
Awesome. So I want to go back to house hacking real quick.
Yeah.
So I know that's a specialty of Second City Real for the boutique. Sorry. There's a lot of inventory on the north side for house hacking. When someone approaches you and said, "Hey, Brie, I'm looking for something on the north side, and we're looking to house hack," what are some of the expectations that you set with them up front?
Absolutely.
Let me jump in real fast. Define house hack, just in case there's people that don't know what that means.
Yep. So house hacking is the method of typically using low money down programs to use a owner occupied loan. You live in one unit, you rent out the other units. So the advantages are you don't typically need 20% or 25% down as you would with a non-owner occupied unit. And you're able to live there for 1 year and fulfill the occupancy requirement and then move again and use another low money down program. So it gives you the ability to typically buy between 2 or 3 properties if you house hack each one with the same capital you would if you were to buy one as an investment property. Does that explain it?
Perfect. That's perfect.
There's actually not a lot of inventory in the north side of Chicago. There's very little inventory. That's been our number one problem for the past 2 years, is there's nothing to buy for people. And when I say that, I mean, while there might be properties on the market, that does not mean they're a good investment or they're going to cash flow. So our process is this: when someone comes to us and says, hey, I'm looking to house hack on the north side of Chicago. First question we ask is, what's your budget and areas you're looking in? That helps us understand if their goals are realistic, right? If you think if your budget's $200,000, I can tell you that it's not going to get you anywhere near the north side of Chicago unless you're looking to buy a condo. So that's the first question. The second thing we do is we set up a spreadsheet of property examples. So every year I go through what properties my clients bought and try to find ones that are average. So I'm not looking for the home runs. I'm looking for, different quality conditions. So meaning like some properties that need a little bit of cosmetic work, some properties that are already rehabbed. I'm looking at like different neighborhoods. And what I feel is like, okay, this is something that you could find with about 3 months of looking on the market, right? It's not the 1 in a million, once a year sort of deal that comes up. And I always send that to clients before we even schedule a call, because that helps set the expectation. If they're like, hey, I've got $20,000, cash, well, that's not going to get you very far, because what you don't know is that, well, what you hopefully don't know or may not know is that your down payment isn't the only piece of the puzzle. You also have to have closing costs. Closing costs range from $9,000 to $12,000. You also have to have at least 3 months of payments in the bank, and that regulation may be changing currently. So $20,000, while that might cover your 3.5% down payment, that won't cover your reserve requirement, and that won't recover your closing cost requirements. So you're going to need to have about $40,000 to $50,000, even though you're not spending $40,000 to $50,000 to actually get approved for the loan. So once we send that list to people, I always tell them, if you look at these properties, I send them 2 years of properties, so 10 properties. If you look at these properties and you're like, man, I would totally buy any one of those, then this is the right market for you. But if you look at those properties and you're like, I would never live there, I would never pay that, I would never take those returns, then I can tell you right now, the north side of Chicago is not the market for you. From there, we have a longer conversation about expectations. That seems to be one of the biggest holdups from people, is you need to understand that Chicago was built between 1890 and 1920. So having 2 bathrooms, having walk-in closets, having laundry and units, those things are not very typical in the way that our buildings are built, and they're not typically easy to add unless you do a complete full gut renovation and layout change. So if your must-haves are walk-in closets, to a master bathroom, and laundry and unit, then maybe like your budget needs to be around $800,000-$900,000, because now you're buying a completely gut renovated property. So that's also part of the conversation, is like, what's your expectations on where you'll be living? That's a different aspect of things than an investor that's just buying something based on numbers. They're never going to live there. They don't care, right? So that's part of the conversation as well.
Cool. That's awesome. One little tip here, I realized, because, you said about when the housing stock was built between 1880 and really 1920, 1930. The one way if a house was built before 1920, because I think a lot of the dates end up getting messed up, or agents just don't care and put 1910.
Yeah.
When the basement is cobblestone, which is the rocks that look cemented together, they stopped doing that in 1920. So you always know your house older than 1920 when you have cobblestone foundation in the basement.
Yeah, and you typically don't see, like Pilsen, you'll see a lot of that. But on the like Albany Park, Portage Park, Avondale, you typically don't see the limestone block foundations.
Yeah.
But that's another thing, like let's talk about Pilsen for a second. I can tell you right now, like half the clients that come to me and say, I want to live in Pilsen. Pilsen's cool. Pilsen's got hipsters. There's tacos everywhere. Like there's art studios, right? There's breweries, like, people want to live in Pilsen. But half the time someone comes to me about Pilsen, after the first few showings, they do not want to look at Pilsen anymore. Reason being because of the era that Pilsen was one of the first neighborhoods in Chicago that was built. That era during that time have really tiny bedrooms. A typical bedroom size in Pilsen is 7x9, where you can fit a bed, maybe a dresser, but typically a bed. And they start looking at properties in Pilsen and decide like, this does not fit in with what I can live with, right? So they end up looking at other neighborhoods because of that.
When does, let me go one more question back on house hacking. When does a house hack not make sense when it comes down to the numbers? When does it typically not make sense for somebody to do it?
About 90% of the time, it doesn't make sense, to be perfectly honest.
What does some like, is there like a price point, or is there like if you're not covering more than X amount percent of the mortgage, like,
yeah. That's the thing. Like, so again, house hacking is a different beast than just dealing with straight investors, because there's that personal desire. I was out on Sunday looking with clients and they want to look in a specific neighborhood. And unfortunately, that neighborhood typically doesn't cash flow, but they're willing to take lower cash flow to live in the area that they want. That's a very common desire for people. The problem though, is that when you move out, if it's costing you $300 a month to keep that property, right? Why would that be a smart investment? So now you have to sell the property, right? Because who's going to be paying $300 a month just to keep a property? And so that becomes another decision point for people. But for some people, that's okay. They look at, hey, I'm paying $2,000 a month to live in this neighborhood already. Now I'll be paying $1,300 a month to live at this property with house hacking. That's a smart financial decision for me. And then whenever we decide to sell, whenever that may be, we'll deal with the consequences of that decision. But that's part of it, is going through, when we run our analysis for clients, we always run it as what the property would cash flow without living there and what it would look like when you do live there. Again, typically a lot of the neighborhoods I deal with are A, B type markets. But in the last 9 years, my average vacancy is 0.25%. I still run my vacancy at 3%, and I suggest clients do so. Because at most months, your numbers are going to be rent minus mortgage, but I still want you to account for CapEx. I still want you to account for repairs, for vacancy. All those numbers should still be accounted for, because I don't want to sell you sunshine and rainbows, right? My business is, I'm one of the top 10% of agents in the entire Chicagoland area, and I've never done marketing or advertising. My business is 100% referrals. And no investor comes to me and says, hey, I want to do one property, then I'm done, right? Most investors are like, hey, I've got a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year plan, and it involves multiple properties. So if I sell you sunshine and rainbows from the beginning, you're not going to want to work with me for numbers 2 and 3. And a large majority of our clients, as soon as their 1 year is up, they're already under contract or already actively looking for another property. So it's in my best interest to sell you worst case scenario. Then you call me in 6 months and you're like, Brie, something is wrong with the numbers you told me. I'm making way more money than you told me. Great. That's what I want, right? I don't want you calling me in 6 months saying, hey, you never told me about CapEx or vacancy, and now I can't afford my mortgage because I bought this property that never cash flowed in the first place.
So that is one of your I think, good benefits that I admire of you, is you're very honest and you don't sell sunshine and rainbows. So as an agent, that's what people need. So I commend you for that.
You're just shooting yourself in the foot if you do it. We get a decent amount of business from second-time buyers who don't want to work with the agent they worked with them the first time, because they realized, 6, 9, 12 months down the road that the expectations they were sold were not realistic.
We do that in property management, so I know how that is. So
it's heartbreaking sometimes. It really is, but you should have done your research on the get-go and worked with someone who knew what they were talking about.
So house hacking, just summarize that up, is there's not really a threshold where it doesn't make sense, but it's the comfort level someone has with the numbers, and even looking 3-5 years down the road when they might be moving out of the property to see if it makes sense, or at least being on the same page that because it doesn't make sense, we're going to have to sell it once we're done packing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, okay.
Brie, some of these properties that have like the illegal garden unit where it's not, technically zoned, it's a legal 2 unit, but there's 3 living units. Do you guys show those? I'm always confused on, do I count that as a unit of cash flowing? Is that something I should walk away from? Should I look to just duplex down and make it 1 more unit? Like as an agent, how do you work with your clients on those opportunities?
So I'm not a zoning attorney or not a lawyer, so I can't legally.
Sorry for setting you up poorly there.
I can't legally interpret building code and explain it. But there's a provision in the building code. I can send it to you. It's in the show, and you can include it in the show notes. There's a provision in our building code which basically says that you can have 1 additional unit above and beyond what it's zoned for, as long as it was existing prior to 1957 and it meets habitability requirements. And then there's set habitability requirements in terms of egress, what we call window glazing, which is how many square feet per room there is of windows, and ceiling height. So you would always want to consult an attorney to determine if that building meets that code. But that is, and I've talked with, Department of Building inspectors, I've talked with zoning attorneys, I've talked with the Chicago Department of Zoning, I've talked with aldermen, right? And always ask, because if you look in our MLS, right, every other property in Chicago says, the agent and owner do not confirm the legality of the garden unit.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't the city going after people for these? You would think that they would. So the explanation that I've gotten is that because of that provision in our zoning code, to determine if it was existing prior to 1957, there is an architectural review board that has to come in and assess the unit, right? That's a cost of the city. But there's no fine associated with renting out a quote unquote non-zoned unit. So the city would need to create a task force to go look at all these properties, have the architectural review board determine if this unit was existing prior to 1957 or not, and then they don't get anything out of it if it's not, right? There's no fine associated with it. It's quite rare that we see any sort of legal action from the city existing on these units. Only once have I seen, it was a 4-unit property, it was zoned as a 2. The seller had an injunction on the property. So the city issued him an injunction in 1997. And this was being sold in 2017, maybe 2018, that gave him a daily fine for every day that he rented out those 2 units. And the injunction stayed with the property. So my client went to go make an offer on it. During attorney review, this injunction came up and we're like, whoa, what the hell is this? And he's like, I've been, the day after I got the injunction, I rented the units out back in 1997 and haven't had a problem with it since. I'm like, my client decided that the risk was too great to take on that sort of responsibility and backed out of the deal. But that's the only time I've ever seen anything from the city barring someone from actually renting out a unit. And I've probably seen, let's say, 5,000 houses in the city of Chicago.
So for us, just to share, this is all mostly Southside related, is where when you have a garden unit, we'll use as an example as the illegal unit, and you're renting it out, and maybe one of the tenants in the building, maybe it's not even the garden illegal unit tenant, calls 311 because maybe you're forcing them to pay rent, or you're trying to enforce the lease and they don't like it. They call 311. City comes out and then they question that at that point with a list of other admin type violations. And a lot of times that violation comes back as provide plans and permits for the finished space of the illegal apartment, or provide demo permits to remove the illegal space. So I see that often on the South Side, and I tell people a lot that as a landlord, and maybe this is a South Side problem specifically, but as a landlord, you lose leverage with your tenants when you're trying to enforce the lease because they call 301, and then also you end up having to deal with that set of problems. So that's what I've had.
I've had 2 instances for clients. One has a center entrance 4 unit that has 2 garden units. And the other one has a 2 unit on the north side, and the basement unit does not meet the 7-foot ceiling height requirement.
Yeah.
And both times someone had called 311 on the landlord for different issues, and neither time the basements ever got brought up.
Yeah, you're lucky. They're lucky.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I've personally never had a client get in trouble for it. But again, we refer them to an attorney to discuss what the legal implications would be, and make sure that they're looking at what the building code requirements are for that one additional unit per the zoning code.
Gotcha.
Brie, as an agent, obviously you bring your knowledge of the North Side, and you help your potential clients run numbers. How far down the path do you take them? Are you hooking them up with contractors? Like what should someone expect when they're coming to Brie and they're clueless? They need to be handheld through the process. Do you take it from soup to nuts for them?
Yeah, I mean, I've got clients who bought with me 3 years ago that I still talk to all the time. I would say at least 30% of my job is talking with clients after they've already purchased. And yeah, that includes, I just had a client yesterday whose tenant didn't pay rent for 2 months. They bought with me in 2016, so it's been 4 years. Their client didn't pay rent for 2 months, and then the client just moved to Vegas, sent them an email saying, hey, I'm moving out tomorrow, and they left a bunch of stuff. So the question was, hey, can we get rid of this stuff? Like, what do we have to do? So I had to go look up the RLTO for the client, send them what the RLTO says about what they can do with tenant's property. And then the next question was, how do I go after them for the back rent? And then had to refer them over to a lawyer to talk about getting a judgment against them. So yeah, that's something that we do quite often, because most times it's easier to ask me. And if I don't have the answer, then I'll tell you. Or if I don't have a good referral, I'll also tell you, or try to point you in the right direction. But that's a big part of our job, is again, not just the initial purchase, but there's so much to learn about being a landlord that, we can't teach you everything. So the first, I'd say on average, clients take about 6 months to find a property. And during that 6-month period, it's really on the education of the purchase. How do you run numbers? How do you determine market rents? Our goal always is to have the client be able to make their own decisions. We will never, ever talk you into a property, right? So in the beginning, you're just looking at my numbers, right? I'm sending you a list every week. It's one of the features we do for clients is we pre-run every MLS property. So 3 times a day, we get all the listings. And when I say me and Charlie handle the North Side, but there's 8 agents on my team that each handle areas they personally invest in. So our process is we look at every single listing from Pilsen and Jefferson Park to Evanston 3 times a day, and we run it through our initial calculations. This again looks at what your cap rate is, what your cash on cash is, what the rents are, what your expenses are, and spits out a number. If it's above a certain number, we keep it on the list and we send it out to our clients as hey, these properties are probably worth going to see. Then once we go see the properties, we can do a much more in-depth analysis with, comps and rental comps and all those things, expenses. We also look at what repairs are going to be needed over the next 5 years. If the property needs work, we do a repair or a renovation budget, as well as comparing that to what the market rents are going to be, so that you can see side by side, hey, this is what happens if I don't do anything to the property. And this is what happens if I put $100,000 into the property, what my cash on cash and my cap rate looks like. So all of that, though, is teaching you, right? And we encourage clients to push back on us. So in the beginning, I'm just sending you numbers and you're looking at properties. But what we're trying to do is to get you to shift from then, a few months into it, you're looking at a property and you're kind of starting to run your own analysis and then sending it to me to double check your work, right? And then I can write back and say, hey, you didn't see this. You missed that it has radiators, right? That's an additional expense that you're not accounting for. Or you missed this, so we're trying to teach you, right? So by the end of the day, when it's time for you to make an offer, you should be 100% confident in those numbers and that offer is on the house that you want to buy. So that process, for some people, takes about 6 months. But then once you buy it, what do you know about bed bugs, for example? That's not something that comes up every day. Most investors never have issues with bed bugs. But when it does come up, you should probably call me because I know the answer to those sort of things. Or, lease questions. There's a lot to learn that we just can't teach you in a short amount of time.
That's awesome though. That is, from hearing that and from talking to other agents, that is a true separator. So I commend you and your team for being that value add instead of just here's the purchase, good luck with it.
Well,
we see that in the market. We see that in the market so much.
it's in our best interest because we have a very strong base of repeat clients, and we've got a very strong base of referral clients. I have one client who bought with me in 2014, and then he bought another property from me in 2016, and then he referred me to 3 new clients, and then one of those clients bought 2 properties with me. So I've had 6 transactions off of one client because I did such a good job that he and all of his friends hey, wait, you've used $25,000 and now you're paying $300 a month for your rent. I want to do this too. So it snowballs from there. And it's in our best interest to be ethical, responsible, and educational for our client base.
That's great. I want to touch on your portfolio. I know we talked about what you own on the north side, but for those who have heard your story, you also have a large portfolio up in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
So would love to get just kind of compare and contrast is probably the wrong word, but what caused you to go up north? What was what was the deciding factor there, and why do you like that market better than Chicago in some ways? Where is it weaker than Chicago in other ways?
So great question. I'll give you a quick synopsis of my story. I bought properties in Chicago from 2011 to 2013 is when I bought my properties in Chicago. I was able to capitalize on my equity position on one of the properties and pull out a substantial amount of cash. So when I was looking to buy a 4th property, I absolutely love Chicago for a million reasons. I thought of, how many properties am I going to need to be able to retire, right, and not have to work? And I would need a lot of properties and a lot of capital in the city of Chicago to be able to do that, right? Our price points, but when I was buying, they were a lot less. But right now, the average price point is about $650,000. So for me to get $10,000 a month of cash flow, I would need a substantial amount of capital and would run out of financing options, right? There's only a few low money down financing options, and I didn't want to be moving from house to house every year to do so. So I looked at a couple different markets, specifically Kansas City, Milwaukee, Indianapolis. I ended up in Milwaukee and was able to invest for cash flow in that market. So in that market, I bought 28 properties between 2014 and 2015. So that was kind of my investing timeline. I have not bought a property since 2016. In the last 9 months, I've sold 14 properties in the Milwaukee market. Why? And I can explain. So it was a learning curve, right? And I think I mentioned earlier, in any city, in any area, there's A, B, C, and D markets. So I would categorize my Chicago investments as a B market. I would categorize my Milwaukee investments as a C market. There is a very big learning curve going from a B to a C, right? That's another thing people don't understand. You can't use the same numbers. You can't use the same vacancy repairs, CapEx numbers as you do in A, B, C, or D class. You're going to be very sorry down the road when you realize that was a complete fluff. So luckily I ran my numbers, which I thought were very conservative, but they were not even conservative enough. Because what you don't understand is, for example, I bought a house here in Chicago. I said I bought my first 3 flat for $300,000. I bought a 3 flat in Milwaukee for $60,000. That was my first property in Milwaukee. Very, very big price difference, right? The property in Chicago rents for $3,800. The property in Milwaukee rented for, like $1,800, right? The roof costs the same though. So let's just say a $7,000 roof as a percentage of your expenses on $3,800 a month rent versus $1,800 a month rent is very different. Right? You don't get a cheaper roof because you have a cheaper property. So your CapEx numbers need to be a lot higher. So at the end of the day, I always viewed it as Chicago contributed to my overall net worth gain. The properties have always cash flowed, but not enough for me to retire or quit my job. But they delivered me a strong equity position. My Milwaukee properties, on the other hand, were my cash flow properties. Those were the properties that would pay my monthly bills, but not appreciate. And that would be like the different strategy going into it. So what happened was, so we mentioned, I know Mark mentioned in the beginning, the Midwest Real Estate Networking Summit, which will be July 25th and 26th in Chicago. If we don't have our mandate stay at home lifted by then, the event will be virtual, just so you know. And you can go to MidwestRESummit.com for more information on that. But these summits, I travel all over the country to. I know Mark and I went to the first San Francisco summit. When was that? 2014?
Yeah, 2014.
Yeah. Mark and I both flew out to San Francisco. Brandon Turner was there. Who else was there? Brian Burke was there. Aaron Marzillo. It was great. So these conferences are all over the country. I still go to San Francisco. I also spoke at Philly in 2014. So when I was at Philly in 2014, which is Dave Van Horn's event, the Mid-Atlantic Real Estate Summit, the first session of the day was this economist. And he was talking about using all these big words I didn't understand, right? Like, that's definitely one of my downfalls is I understand local rental real estate data. I don't understand the bigger picture of economics, whether that be the stock market, what a yield curve is, and how that affects real estate. And that was something that I really wanted to understand. So after the day, they did a charity auction. So this economist came up for bid, and it was like 3 hours of his time. And so I paid to have 3 hours of his time for counseling. And I wanted to learn, what I should be looking at, what I need to know with economics. And part of that process was he offered to do a deep dive into my investment portfolio. So I went back and looked at, I had 5 years of cash flow data. I went back and looked at what my properties I bought them for, what my loans were, what I could sell them for. And he put on all these different calculations and spit out all these different numbers and said to me, I would sell anything that you're not willing to hold in a recession. So the two things I learned from that was I was looking at my data, like every year I would obviously review my data and review my cash flow, but I never really went back and looked at like 5 years of it all at once. And I would see that there were certain properties where like every year something would always come up. Every year we would just have problems with these properties. And at the end of the day, I'm cash flowing $1,000 a year on this property because we have high turnover or whatever the issue may be. And I could sell it, I bought it for 65, I could sell it for 120. Why wouldn't I do that? So I went through and looked at any property that I could get 10 years of cash flow up front, I sold. And then any property that was about between 5 and 10 years, I called my property manager on. I had a discussion with them. Hey, is there something like, have we just had bad luck? Or is there something else going on like that I don't know about or can't see from this data to understand, like, are this going to be continual problems moving forward? We've had, 3 of the last 5 years have been bad. Is this what I should expect moving forward? Or have we done everything that we need to do to the property and now we should be sitting pretty for the next 5 years? And then went through a decision-making process on those. So that's how I ended up selling 14 properties in the last 9 months. I just closed my last one April 21st. So, but part of that exercise made me look at, in the last 5 years, what was my total appreciation gain across both my portfolios? What was my total cash flow across both my portfolios? And when I add those two numbers together, Chicago killed Milwaukee, killed it. Because I made so much more money on the appreciation from my Chicago properties than I ever would cash flowing on just my Milwaukee properties. Luckily, my Milwaukee properties appreciated. We had some really good, but some of them were just no-brainers to sell. That property that I mentioned, I said my first property, I bought a 3-unit for $65,000. It rented for $1,800. We never really had any, big problems with it, but I sold it for $120. So, and I think it was averaging like $5,000 a year cash flow. Why wouldn't I sell it if I'm going to get $60,000? And plus my loan had been paid down. So that was part of the analysis. But yeah, at the end of the day, when you throw it all together, Chicago completely beat out Milwaukee in terms of annual cash flow / appreciation.
Cool. That's a very in-depth answer. So I appreciate that. You run a monthly.
You can't predict. You can't obviously predict, the market and that sort of thing. So most investors choose to go only on cash flow because appreciation is, it's an assumption. So keep that in mind, right? A lot of it was luck of the time of when I started investing as well.
You have a monthly meetup that meets on Northwest Side, Porch Park, right?
Norridge Park.
Norridge Park. And you have had this huge real estate investor conference last 2 years, and we're going on the third year. What makes you do those things? Is it helping other people? Is it promote yourself? Like, what do you think you're helping other people with, I guess, in that sense? Or tell us about the why.
The why is really that I love it, right? I think real estate investing is a very unique clique. We'll call it a clique. It's a very small network, really, of real estate investors. And one of the things I absolutely love about real estate investors is this is not just a job for us. People don't get into real estate thinking this is like a 9 to 5, I get to punch out sort of thing. Like, this is a lifestyle decision for most people. And it all started with that conference in San Francisco. It said Mark and I both got random phone calls from some guy, Jay Martin, we didn't know who he was, and says, hey, do you want to pay for your own flight and hotel to fly out to San Francisco and donate your time speaking to a bunch of people about real estate investing? I know Mark and I are both like, yeah, that sounds like that.
Yeah, I was excited.
Why? Like, it doesn't make sense. But I mean, I always say, like, you could stick 20 real estate investors in a room with a case of wine and they will not leave for days, because there's always something to talk about, because we have this core belief of why we do this, right? And that's why that even when I first met my husband, I met him the weekend before I was going out to 𝗤𝗲𝗃𝗁𝗁𝗃𝗃 conference in Denver. And, he's like, I don't understand why you cover your own expenses. You essentially work for free and you're up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and you're, there talking till 10 o'clock at night just to go do it all again in the morning. I'm like, because I love it. Right. So that's why we've had the meetup for about 7 years now. And so this is the third year of the conference. A lot of it is just the love and passion for real estate, but I always learn something. And that's one of the values of real estate networking events that are very open, is there's always something to learn, right? No one has all the answers. I don't have all the answers. You guys don't have all the answers. And if you're not continually growing and learning, then you're just stagnant in your business. So these are all opportunities for you. So Aaron Marzillo, who spoke at Jay Martin's first event, he's a wholesaler. I've got zero interest in ever doing any sort of wholesaling. I hate wholesaling, but I learned so much from his presentation, on things that I was able to take away and apply to my own business. Never would have thought that I would have learned something from someone that does something so differently than I do.
Cool. That's awesome. We're going to go into the interview wrap up. These are questions we ask everybody that comes on here. And we are trying to find all the answers by interviewing everybody. So that's one thing we are trying to do. But, we'll roll through these. Give us your quick first thought response. What is your competitive advantage? How have you been able to do what you've been able to do that other people have not?
Having personal knowledge. Having personal knowledge of investing. Of the 8 agents that we have, all of them work in areas they personally invest in. And I think that's a huge competitive advantage. Plus, again, we all take an educational approach on things. This is not a one and done transaction. You're going to have questions, years down the road. You can always call us and ask us. And we're looking to help you build your portfolio side by side along with you.
So NBC was right. The more you know. When we all grew up in the same era with the more you know commercials.
and we'll link to NBC.
Yeah.
I learned too. There's, situations that come up that I've never experienced, and I get to learn through my clients then, and then help the next person that it comes up with. Even if I haven't personally experienced, I've lived through it with someone else.
Yeah. Brie, what is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property in Chicago?
You need to go visit the property. You can't sit in a computer, from wherever you are and think that Chicago properties, Chicago neighborhoods.
Good
answer. What do you do for fun?
What? I don't know.
It's legal now, so we're cool. No, I'm joking.
Well, I just had a baby almost 9 months ago. So before the baby, my husband and I would take motorcycle rides. We would spend about 20 to 30 hours a week on the motorcycle, taking trips. And now that's not really feasible. And with the stay-at-home order, and it's just starting to get nice. Currently, our fun is we take the baby for bike rides or we hang out in our backyard.
Cool. So you went from a motorcycle to a tricycle almost.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's one of those trailers in the back of the bike thing. Yeah.
What's a good book, podcast, or self-development method you are currently using and you'd recommend to our listeners?
I absolutely recommend getting things done. So I was too busy to read the book. So I bought the Cliff Note version on Amazon about 4 years ago, and it has been so impactful with my business. Like I said, I have my own investment properties. I run a brokerage company. I run a monthly meetup, and then I run an annual conference with about 400 attendees. And I was working 60 hours a week, or more. I was always working. My husband would always complain because I was always on my phone at like 9 o'clock at night. And that book really changed my life as far as an organizational method. So currently, it's like in winter, I work about 20 hours a week. In summer, I work about 30 hours a week. So I've been able to cut my time in half, and utilizing that book was really the cornerstone of starting to implement those sort of processes within my business to have more free time than I have to work.
Besides yourself, name one person in your local network that you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
I usually recommend Mark. So again, it depends on the area though, right? That's the kind. Chicago is too big for one person to know the entire city of Chicago and the suburbs. So it really depends on the area that they're looking in. But there's plenty of different resources, different agents, contractors, whatever. It just depends on, where you're looking and what you're looking to do. Even said, I specialize in buy and hold. Flipping is not my area of expertise. So if you're looking to flip on the north side of Chicago, I would refer you out to someone else. So it just really depends on what you're looking to do.
So reach out to you and you'll be able to connect to people.
As much as I can.
Brie, thanks so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? And is there any way they can provide value to you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm usually on BiggerPockets. That's the easiest way to reach me. You can look me up as Brie Schmidt. Again, the Midwest Real Estate Networking Summit is July 25th and 26th. Whether it's going to be in person or virtual is TBD. But you can go to MidwestRESummit.com and find out more information about our speakers and ticketing options.
And we'll definitely leave that in the show notes. So listeners, if you found Brie added value to today, please take 20 seconds to give us a 5-star review. Reviews equal exposure, which equals ability to provide more and more value to our listeners. Thank you, Brie, and thank you for listening. We want to hear from you. So please drop us a line at straightupchicagoinvestor@gmail.com or visit us at straightupinvestor.com, where you can listen to all of our past shows and learn about our upcoming shows. If you know anyone that would be a valuable guest, let us know, as we're always looking for a top-tier guest to add value to our listeners. Stay healthy, stay safe. And Brie, thank you very much again for coming on here. And we all look forward to your event, and any way that we can help promote that event for you virtually or in person, we're here for you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Brie.
Have a good one.